Is it possible to be permanently connected to your higher self and draw information from it? Well, it's like I want it to always be there, like a third hand that I've grown and it's always here. Not just that I connect to it sometimes and then come back, but I want it to work in the background all the time. Yeah, it's possible, but for that you need to practice a bit, as they say. It's not like I just connect to it sometimes and then leave. I want it to work in the background all the time.
Well, yeah, you can, but for that you need to practice a little, as they say. So, I mean, if you really dive into this topic and, you've been doing all these things for, I don't know, a day, 2, 3, then in that context, it's going to be a bit challenging. But if you practice for a long time, then this hand, it grows over the years, over the months of practice, and you start to feel that extra support that's always right there with you. But that takes time. But if you practice for a long time, then this hand, it grows over the years, over the months of practice, and you start to feel that extra support that's always right there with you. But that comes with time. In the early stages, I think it's not quite like that. But that comes with time. At the early stages, I think not.
So every time I want to connect with my higher self, I sit down to meditate and it's when it happens.
Yeah. In the early stages, yes, definitely. And even at the later stages, actually, I've talked about this many times everywhere. If you want to explore something deep, you still need to dive in. So, for example, if I'm looking into something, I don't know, the past, the future, the present, something really deep and global, where the mind can really get in the way, even then, I still sit down, even though I have 25 years of this practice, connecting with my higher self since my early teenage years. I still sit down, dive in, reset myself, let go of my mind, go deeper, and that's the only way. But if it's something not too complicated, then you can actually do it without diving in.
How can a well-developed connection with the higher self actually impact everyday life in a positive way?
Listen, I'll share from my own experience. I know that viewers love to share, right? When there's a story told through personal examples. Well, first of all, for example, I get up, I wake up and I need to do something, just the usual everyday stuff. So actually, it might sound a bit strange, but you can consult your higher self about absolutely any questions. I mean, like what to eat for breakfast, an apple or a pear, like I have in my course. The guys are laughing about this. In the 4th month, what to eat? A pear or an apple? And it seems a bit inappropriate to bother the higher self with such questions, but still you can do it and you'll see the answer. So, it's like being your own dietitian, nutritionist, psychotherapist, and so on. So you ate the delicious food that you saw was the most harmonious for you to eat right now through your higher self. Yeah, some people go to ChatGPT, count calories, send their photos, but you can totally do it through your higher self with much better results and more accuracy just for you. After that, you need to go somewhere, but for example, you just don't feel like it. You're really lazy, right? Great. I went to the USA and checked whether to go or not. Again, it's the simplest everyday topic, right? Many people modern esotericism has put so much seriousness around the topic of the higher self, making it seem like it has to be something very sacred. It's sacred. There are many sacred deep levels, but you can definitely consult about the most simple everyday things. Should I buy a new iPhone on credit tomorrow? Wait until payday and buy it with my own money? Well, something along those lines. Life changes. If you're consulting, you hear me, then life changes dramatically. Absolutely. Because the more questions you explore from those levels, the better you understand the universe as a whole. Everything. And here I would like to add something. In fact, you can go in and look at the iPhone, for example. Yes, should you buy a new iPhone or not? And suddenly, you'll start getting information about your lifestyle, your purchases, what you're spending your money on, general about iPhones, what they are, and about phones in general, and about the connections between people. And in the end, we started simply by buying an iPhone, but ended up with a very deep philosophy about, yes, in general, how interpersonal communication is structured in the modern age, about how, how people interact with each other now and before, whether it's good or bad, and so on. I saw recently that Konstantin Ernst compared Jobs to Hitler, because he killed communication, he killed the interaction between people, right? he moved it into the digital realm. This is an absolutely standard story for the higher self. You start off with an Apple product, and in 5 minutes, you realize you're uncovering some laws of the universe, some cosmic things. Well, something like that.
Well, regarding Steve Jobs, I think you can look at it from different angles. That's true. You could say that he took communication away from people, but on the other hand, you could also say that he gave communication to an insane number of people.
Yes, that's true. Yes, yes, yes. But again, you need to look at it from a higher perspective. It seems coherent from the mind, right? But you need to take a look.
Well, whenever the topic comes up about, there are people who talk about intuitive eating, for example. So that kind of thing exists. And when you talk about reaching the higher self, like, should I have this or that right now? I think there should be a certain level of awareness and probably a certain level of knowledge, at least in order to, basically, I'm not trying to question everything, but I just understand for myself, So right now I'm like, oh, I have this intuitive eating thing. I feel like I want to eat a chocolate bar or some candy, or I don't know, go have a cream puff. Drink beer. How right and good is that? Yeah, how good and right is that for my body? So I'm always for getting to the truth and understanding at what point I'm really communicating with my higher self, at what point I'm actually receiving information from somewhere, and that it's right for me, not just my mind playing tricks or my, what's it called? So we were talking on a call once and our souls were on a whim, like how that just hits you. So when you just want something, we understand that, for example, eating a Snickers is way worse than having, I don't know, an avocado toast, for instance. But internally, I can think and imagine that my higher self is telling me Snickers, double Snickers, big Snickers, eat it. So how do I determine and understand, not just for myself, but for people in general, that I'm really receiving information from the higher self and that it's actually beneficial for me?
Yeah, we've already talked about this topic. First of all, the higher self has clear criteria. I'll elaborate a bit more on this. There are absolutely clear criteria for connecting with the higher self. That's the first one. I'll talk about this a bit later. Second, actually, I'm always surprised when I see comments under my videos where people say things like, what is he even talking about? Or he's saying something so unclear. Something so strange. Actually, I'm talking about very simple things. So what I'm saying is, first, every person has an immortal part inside them that stays with them forever after death, that flies off to those very worlds, and that essentially is them. Because of that, I actually didn't use my higher self for many years. I used my true self. So your true self, and the course is called Return. In general, my entire school, all my books, my text, it's all about returning to the true self. Listen, self is just a clearer term for everyone. That's what we're talking about. That's it. That's the first thing I say. And the second thing I say is that with this eternal part of yourself, you can feel it within you and use its wisdom, its knowledge for your own benefit, to live this life more harmoniously, better, and all that. That's it. That's all I have to say. That's it. That's all I'm saying. These truths are actually so well defined. And now look, that was a specific passage for the viewers, first and foremost. And now, regarding your question, still, I would specifically differentiate between the soul and the spirit here. We've already talked about this topic with you again. In esotericism, yes, the soul is a certain substance that is cultivated throughout your life. Again, there are many different views on this topic, but this is the most common, according to the classics. You cultivate it in this life, and indeed your soul can pull you in different directions. It can pull you towards chocolate, beer, drugs, or something else. That's true, because it needs to be nurtured so that it becomes harmonious, so that it becomes experienced and wise. There is spirit. By the way, when I was preparing for this interview, I looked into Sufism. In Sufism, they have two terms. Unfortunately, I can't recall them right now, because this is more your area of interest, but they clearly distinguish two terms in Sufism. One represents the soul, like formerly the soul, and the other represents the spirit. And if we talk about the spirit, about that true spark of the Creator, which is eternal, indivisible, and exists in every person, again, I don't know how much this will align with religion, so I definitely don't want to offend anyone. I'm speaking from the perspective of esotericism right now. Still, you can sell your soul, right? You can sell it, I don't know, to the devil. It can cry and suffer and all that. Why? Because the soul is a cultivated concept in esotericism. That's something you cultivate throughout your life, but with the spirit, you can't really do anything with it. Again, this is from the perspective of esotericism and what I've seen in my own practice. That is, the soul is literally yours. It's like a part of you, right? It's a part of you, specifically this personality, this life. For those who believe in reincarnation, it's exactly what you cultivate in this life, in this incarnation, becoming better, improving your soulful qualities and so on. And this soul, you can sell it and all that. You can lose it, you can tarnish it, and so on. All the terms commonly used in Russian regarding the soul apply here. But with the spirit, you can't do anything with it. It's your immortal, eternal part that essentially plays through all this experience. And it's like a driver, right? And that connection to the higher self is the connection to your spirit, not to the soul. It's important to clarify that the higher self or true self is your spirit, that immortal part that exists in every person. I don't think anyone here will argue with that. And you can connect with it using different techniques. And the technique I'm talking about is the method of complete and total disidentification. This is actually one of the oldest techniques. It's accepted. In Dzogchen, it's also used. In Vipassana, in many branches of yoga, and in many schools of Zen Buddhism. All the people from the past, let's call them that, who were on the path to the spirit, mostly went through the method of transcendental meditation and disidentification. It was called by different names, different terms, but it was basically about the same thing. So these methods are, roughly speaking, about letting go of everything that relates to you, to your current personality, so that your own eternal true self can manifest and reveal itself from within during the process of disidentification. What's interesting is that there are many different levels, different layers, and many yogis, for example, describe that at a certain stage you'll experience an inner emptiness without paying much attention to it. At some point, you'll experience an inner goodness, harmony, amrita, without paying any attention to it. And then at some point, following the path of complete and total disidentification, you'll come to the manifestation of your true depth, your essence. And this is exactly the criterion, again, now answering your question, which I've been leading up to. This is the criterion for touching the spirit, because these are very high energies and vibrations that reveal themselves naturally during the process of disidentification or any similar practices of that kind. It's a whole complex, of course, so it's not just one practice. It's a multifaceted complex, but the essence is roughly like this. And this also serves as a protection against all sorts of entities, connections, and, I don't know, egregorial stories, because you're not connecting to anything. Instead, you're disconnecting from everything so that at a certain stage, this fundamental basic layer can express itself from the heart or from the heart center or from the upper chakra, usually from one of these two, from the upper center or the heart center. You don't attract it on your own. It reveals itself by itself. Naturally, during the process of disidentification, you won't be able to disidentify with it because it's a transcendental level that lies beyond the mind. The mind still gets disidentified, but this is what lies beyond the mind.
Maybe you've answered this question in previous interviews on our channel, but who knows? We have new viewers watching now. Can you just imagine that a 3-year-old child is sitting in front of you and you need to explain to this 3-year-old what spirit is, what the higher self is? Could you do that?
Of course. I've already explained it to my own child. I would just approach him, squat down in front of him, and say that what lies deep in your heart is, if you just look inside yourself, into your heart, into the depths of your heart, without thinking about anything, just close your eyes and touch the depth of your heart, right there, into it. And there you will truly and genuinely find a great and profound sense of home, a very deep and profound feeling of peace, silence, wisdom, and a sense of inner joy, of inner infinity. And by the way, this will work with a 3-year-old because they haven't lost it yet. With a 3-year-old, when you look them in the eyes, you can see their spirit. There's just pure light coming from their eyes. But somewhere around 5, 6, 7, or 8 years old, when the mind starts to kick in, along with all sorts of social conditioning and so on, that's when you need to start disidentifying a bit from those things. With a 3-year-old, it works like a charm.
There won't be any kind of straightforward answer, right? Like, spirit is something, matter somewhere in the cosmos, in the universe, with which I have a certain connection.
I'm a practitioner. I'm not a theorist in this regard. So I use what works. What works, what really changes a person's life. That's what is something we can really touch and gain a certain benefit from. You could say, people really like to have benefits, to have something to gain. Here's the benefit. It might not be exactly a mental benefit. It might be some kind of transcendent benefit that you wouldn't initially consider as a benefit, but that's also to some extent a benefit from it. Wow. So I always connect everything to practice.
Can you perhaps look into the future through the higher self and maybe potentially predict something like that? So here's a question.
Yes.
How does it work? If it does,
you can and probably should. I have an alumni club. We mentioned it before, and these are very powerful practices. They've learned this technique and have really touched the spirit in a very clear, strong way. You can actually see that a person who has touched the spirit, 2 or 3 criteria of a person who has touched the spirit, things are gradually getting better for him in life. He has inner silence, inner peace, and inner harmony in the broadest sense of the word. It's also about relationships. He's not really triggered by things that used to bother him before. It's about the events in his life, because overall the events become more positive, more harmonious. You could say he's generally changing. He has less of that obvious ego, fewer resistances, and he doesn't have that strong desire to argue and prove something to someone, including in comments to justify his point. Yeah, exactly. Well, it's definitely a joke. Yeah, it's a joke. It's just, it's quite a common occurrence. And it's clear to everyone right here on YouTube so that all the viewers understand what I'm talking about. Everything gets better, warm, calm, and you can really feel the warmth coming from that person. So warmth, calmness, and tranquility. And there are a lot of these guys who have really felt their spirit. There are many of them, and we often do joint viewings with them in the club. And lately they've been doing it themselves. The club is already self-organizing. They choose a topic and vote. They have complete democracy there. They vote on the topic, choose a topic, then write the text and post it. They've already got their own editors and so on and so forth. And he just brings me the finished text. So look, we've looked at the future of Moscow, like through the higher self. What will happen to Moscow in 500 years? Or what will happen to St. Petersburg in 500 years? So it's possible, it's doable, it's necessary. We actively use and practice this really, really actively. I think the texts turn out really great. That's how it is.
Honestly, I'm curious about what will happen to Moscow in, say, 50 years or 30 years. Or overall, I'd actually be more interested in what will happen to the world in the next 10, 15, 20 years. But it's absolutely uninteresting. 20 years, but it's absolutely uninteresting. I'm saying this now without any devaluation. In general, so, for example, what will happen to Moscow in 500 years? Honestly, I don't care at all for one simple reason. I'll never be able to verify that in my life. And I can say anything, like Moscow will be like nice in 500 years. People will be sailing on boats and so on, and people will believe me now, but tomorrow will all be gone. And in 500 years, it'll be 5, 6, maybe even 7 generations later. And no one will remember our conversation. But maybe you have some information, maybe you did some reviews, or your club did some reviews. Well, in the next 5, 10 years, something about the world or something about Russia. Well, I mean, some topics that are closer to people. Yeah. Go ahead, fly around.
We looked at it, and I think maybe it's worth going to the higher level now, like we sometimes did in previous videos, but in general, we've done this many times, so I'll just share it from memory. Look, regarding the near future, sometimes I'm criticized for not predicting any apocalypses. yeah, the whole world will be washed away, unfortunately or fortunately. I see the future quite optimistically. I see, and all of us see, especially all of us guys who are into this topic, including in my club, we see that the future will gradually become more harmonious, more relaxed, and more multifaceted. The problems won't just disappear, of course. They will still be there. It's not like we'll wake up tomorrow and everything will be fine. The future is bright. Robots sing songs to us. Everyone wears scarlet flowers. Everything will be a bit different. But still, the overall trend of the world's development is moving upward in vibrations. Again, this is very easy to prove. My favorite example is the Middle Ages. If you approached a Christian in the Middle Ages and said to him, "Dear Christian, I want to tell you about your inner child, about how you need to love it, about how important the skill of self-expression is, about how you shouldn't suppress your emotions, that you need to express them, otherwise they can
Manifest in this world?
manifest in this world, otherwise they can psychosomatically cause you all sorts of diseases, including cancer." This peasant has two options. Either he'll just run away or he'll smack you on the head with a shovel right here. And since then, the world has changed. It has become more multifaceted. In this world right now, the very idea that we can discuss things like our inner child, the value of self-expression, and so on, already shows that the overall vibrational background has risen. It has definitely gotten higher, and yes, the problems have also become more complex, more intricate. In the past, if one tribe didn't like something, they would grab stones and clubs, go and beat up the other tribe, and then the second tribe would beat up the first tribe, and after a while, that was it. The world and friendship and chewing gum exchanged, I don't know, wives, pieces of meat, something like that. Again, it's very figurative. Yeah, it won't work that way today. So as the world becomes higher in vibrations, it also becomes more complex, more intricate, and more complicated problems arise that didn't really concern the world before. And now they have started to concern us. So nevertheless, in the near future, and if we're talking about Moscow, about Russia, in the near future, say in 30 or 50 years, I don't see any apocalypse coming. I don't see any terrible upheavals like tsunamis or alien invasions either. To be honest, I don't see any alien invasions happening in the next 100 to 200 years. I can feel that they are here, just like we did a dive into the UFOs. They are here, but later, that's all. The topic of direct contact with aliens is much later. This isn't an idea for the near future, possibly even for the next century. I see that Moscow is changing, the climate is changing, by the way, it's definitely getting milder. People are changing, they are becoming more flexible overall in society, in politics, in religion, in the economy. Everything is becoming more adaptable. Of course, there will be upheavals and crises. So there will definitely be some crises, both economic and political crises of various kinds. But if you look at the overall trend, even with some dips, it will still go upward. So towards a bigger social state, towards a more peaceful state, towards a bigger, well, including the city of Moscow, yeah, towards a more convenient city. Well, all these boring, absolutely boring, non-hype topics, but this is really what we see. Well, something like that.
Of course, I would like to hear from you. Urgently, everyone to Siberia. You need to be there because of earthquakes, floods, nuclear war. In Moscow. Thank you. The AS will explode somewhere and something else. Well, basically, you understand. Because in any case, I think people tend to prefer a bit of negative news.
Speaking of negative, about the negative. By the way, about the explosion at the nuclear power plant, I'll put it this way. The events of the last 2 years, the first thing that came to mind when all this started a few years ago, is the idea that maybe something nuclear will happen. Not global. There won't be anything global, but we've looked into this many times, and all the guys from the club confirm that the threat of a nuclear or local explosion, some kind of local contamination, isn't necessarily just on the territory of Russia or, I don't know, Ukraine or any other country. But in the near future, there could be some nuclear threat. And it can still be felt, well, you know, in the world overall. In the world overall, yeah. In the world overall, this is just a little bit of negativity. It's always floating. The future is always floating. A little bit, for example, we looked into it in 2022. There was a certain branch of reality back then, and then 2023 came, and it changed a bit. The overall direction of this upward movement is still the same everywhere. You can move up with certain dips in some areas, and these dips kind of fluctuate. What was seen, roughly speaking, in 2022, by the end of 2022, was no longer there. 2023, and in 2023, it changes a bit, and in 2024, it changes a bit. And this topic with the nuclear situation, it just hangs in the air, and it might manifest or it might not. Globally, in terms of the whole world, it won't have any impact. But locally, it might manifest. That's true, yeah, and that's why this topic needs to be monitored. Anyway, keep an eye on the news, see what they're saying, especially if people live near places like that. It's worth looking at the overall trend in that area, because it might not manifest in a specific place, but rather on the whole planet Earth. This is just little clarification.
The reason I asked is, in general, around the world, not just specifically in Russia, and at that moment I'm sitting here smiling, and just in case, I'll explain to the viewers why I'm smiling. They're planning to build a nuclear power plant in Kazakhstan soon, and a lot of people aren't really on board with this idea because, well, it's like we all say, we know how things are built here in Kazakhstan, how everything is done, how much is stolen, and so on and so forth. And it feels like building a nuclear power plant is just, I mean, most of us Kazakhs think that, well, some part of Kazakhstan is probably not going to exist soon, because knowing how things usually go here, it's likely that everything will just blow up. And it feels like building an AC is purely. So most of us Kazakhs feel like, well, it seems like some part of Kazakhstan won't be around for long, because knowing how things usually go here, it's likely that everything will just blow up. Honestly, I really wouldn't want that. I really wouldn't, for real. I wouldn't want to, honestly, I really wouldn't want that, honestly. When we were on the phone, you mentioned that you've never consumed alcohol in your life, that you've never tried anything, no stimulants or anything at all. Never, yeah. And I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. And basically, with that answer, you've already addressed it, but maybe you can elaborate a bit more anyway. How does this affect the overall connection with the higher self and the ability to reach certain states and so on?
Listen, we need some statistics here because I have my own experience where I didn't use anything. In a good way, in a good way. That is, I actually, look, in this regard, again, I graduated very rationally. I told you I graduated from Moscow State University, the political science department, plus I graduated from this same department and wrote this very dissertation. So I actually have a certain balance from both a spiritual perspective and a purely rational one. Therefore, in this regard, for this we need to get together with the club, for example, or with new guys and conduct statistics. Take those guys who have used a lot of different things in their lives and see how much faster their group, their focus group, will reach the higher self than those guys who, for example, take me or anyone else who has never used anything and compare, but intuitively. If a person hasn't used anything, for some reason, I don't know, maybe out of fear. So he has this fear, a strong psychological trauma from childhood, where his father drank, smoked, and abused him. And then he decided, that's it. I will never use anything in my life so I don't end up like my father. It can be such a strong trauma in a person that it will interfere with connecting to the higher self, because it will be in the mental layer. Once again, for those who haven't seen my previous interviews, the physical body, the etheric, the astral, the mental, and the higher bodies, those are the bodies of the higher self. This is the simplest, very primitive scheme. And in the mental body, this block will be hanging there. It's a trauma. It will stay there and it will already interfere with the connection. But if, let's say, a person hasn't really stressed about it during their life and just drank alcohol on holidays, maybe smoked a few cigarettes here and there, let's not dive into anything too heavy, as they say. And at the same time, he doesn't have any particular problems, no significant traumas, thing like that. Maybe he will be able to connect faster than someone who has consciously buried themselves under strong childhood grievances and traumas like, I don't know, against their father, mother, or anyone else. In general, it's hard to say. We need a sample, statistics, and an experiment. Then it will be clearer.
Can I do any practices that, let's say, clean up Background. I didn't understand the question. So let's say I've made some holes in my mental body. Can I patch those holes up so that I can work with my higher self just like you do?
I actually wanted to say that, look, if we're going to dig into this or into all these psychostimulants, what do they actually do? Again, I've never used them, but the people who have, I've seen them before and after. I didn't see them during, but I felt something from the field before and after. Do you understand what this can be compared to? Again, take some psychostimulants that enhance clairvoyance, clairsentience, and expand consciousness. They act like explosion of that nuclear bomb. Sisto, it is always very Sashur Ukraine. A big, strong stimulation of these very chakras, these very energy channels, and so on and so forth. So what happens to a person who has never been to the gym and suddenly shows up at the gym, takes some painkillers and starts working out? At the moment he's in that gym, everything will probably be more or less fine and painless. But then the next day, he'll realize that it was a completely reckless decision. It's the same here. And the chakras, the channels, they're just not ready. The centers, the dantians, if we're talking about Qigong, they're just not ready to be yanked into accelerated work in such a forceful way. And at the first stage, maybe it won't be felt much. But if you do this systematically, and a person, again, in aesthetics, there's this term, a person is not ready. If a person isn't mentally ready but keeps pulling themselves up to a certain level with all sorts of psychostimulants, it puts some kind of burden on them, How much can it interfere with connecting to the higher self? Again, we need to conduct some statistical analysis, but at the very least, they definitely don't make it easier to connect with the higher self. That's for sure, because there will still be certain layers, a certain background that will have to be, possibly unraveled. This is just a pure assumption, it's like a hypothesis in science that needs to be tested, but I assume that the results will most likely be positive after all this. What to do with all of this? First of all, when you come to my practice, I always tell everyone, guys, when you come to my course, let's completely give up alcohol as much as possible. Let's give up cigarettes. And of course, let's completely give up drugs in any form. So if they exist, we deal with them first. Let's give up any psychostimulants. And for those 6 months that the guys are with me, or even better, a year, so 6 months, and another 6 months after that, let's spend this year clean. Just the very commitment to going through this clean already contributes to some kind of purification, because after all, it's your inner world and your decision to engage and try to understand the world in a clean way. The intention itself, it works. So in that sense, at least there's that. You can't change the past anymore. Yeah, you can go to a psychotherapist, a hypnotherapist, or a progressologist who will help you revisit your past. You'll be replaying your scenarios where you didn't do that. Finding the reasons why you did that, unraveling those knots and so on. Sure, you can do that too, but that could take another year, 2 or 3, and so on. So at the very least, just set the intention that if we're going in clean, then we're going to be clean for a year. That's it.
When we talk about all sorts of psychostimulants and so on, we can also include in this various nootropics and so on. That is, we are not talking only about some...
Yes, we include everything, all the chemistry and chemistry, yes. But if it's a nootropic that enhances brain function, I would say if I were in the shoes of someone wanting to connect with the higher self while using nootropics, I would give them up to really go in clean. This is because any substance has, you could say, conditionally, some kind of egregorial thing, and you can connect to something, or just because it will create background noise and interfere. On one hand, it has a certain egregorial aspect, including pharmacology.
Well, you could say conditionally there's some kind of egregorial thing and you can connect to something, or just because it will create background noise and interfere.
On one hand, it has a certain egregorial aspect, including pharmacology. Yes. On one hand. On the other hand, it's still an impact on the body. It's an impact at the cellular level, it's an impact at the tissue level, and it's an impact on the neural pathways in the brain. It's one thing if you just eat regular familiar food that everyone there is already used to eating and everything is great. But if you use chemicals that slightly unnaturally accelerate some neural chains and so on, well, after all, it is an analog of that very bomb, which in this case works well, which is harmless, safe, but it still interferes a little with your mental body, speaking in aesthetic language, and with the etheric body, and with the astral body a little bit, not much. But it can slightly interfere with various meditative practices, entering transcendental layers and so on. Of course, I can totally see someone saying, and the viewers too, that they accept this and meditate, and it's going much better for them. In classic meditations, yes. But if we're talking about transcendental approaches, including through the path of diversity, it's a very pure path. It by itself, if you can even call it that, contains the egregore of purity. Yes, and if you want to go through this egregore of purity, let's call it that, then it's definitely better to go in clean. It's better to go in clean. The effectiveness will be much faster and much more complete.
Do you even believe in more retrograde Mercuries, the moon not being in the right phase, Jupiter being behind Saturn, and so on?
Behind Saturn, let's figure it out. I don't like to believe or not believe. I like to understand. Let's take the planets. The planets definitely have their own energy. The arrangement of the planets in relation to each other definitely carries a certain energy. Astrology and your birth date, all of that, it's like, as I see it, we also tapped into a higher understanding on this topic. It's like these stargates through which your spirit comes here and starts to slowly realize its potential, nurturing the soul of this top, as we talked about, and so on. Again, guys, when it comes to spirit and soul, don't get hung up on the terms. It's just one of those concepts, I guess. I actually mainly use the etheric body in the course, meaning the physical body, the etheric astral, the mental, and the higher bodies. So there's the mortal body and there's the immortal body. Everything else can be debated endlessly, and it won't really make any sense because there's the mortal body and there's the immortal body. That's it. And the rest, as they say, you can call it whatever you want. Let's get back to astrology. It's not that I believe it. I really feel that certain stargates influence the structure of these etheric, astral, and mental bodies. But look, the spirit itself chooses here on which day to come. So it's not just randomly like, oh, I just happen to be an Aries. No, the spirit makes a choice to come into this body or that body, this one or that one, in order for this body to align as harmoniously as possible with its goals and tasks for this life, whatever it is that it chose for itself. So I believe in that. I feel that it's real. But the degree of influence of all this, like the degree of influence, for example, they say that during retrograde Mercury, you shouldn't start, groups. But since 2013, I've been running my school for 12 years now. And I often end up starting groups during retrograde Mercury. But sometimes not. Sometimes just during regular Mercury, sometimes during retrograde. I don't look at that in my life. I don't focus on that. When I checked, it matched partially. Yes, partially it really does match in some areas of life, and in others it doesn't. When it comes to the influence of the stars, there's definitely an influence, but the absolute nature of that influence, in my opinion, is somewhat exaggerated. That's if we're answering the question,
how can I tell if I have some internal blocks, like obstacles or something like that, that are preventing me from connecting with my higher self? And of course, what steps can be taken to, actually get rid of that?
About the obstacles and blocks? That's absolutely true. It's the blocks that have the strongest impact on your connection with your higher self. I'll explain why. The thing is, when you have a lot of what I call stones in your mental body, specifically in your mind, in the mental body, in your mind, you'll just keep bumping into them and you won't be able to break free from them. No way. You can't just push through them. So you'll just be bumping against a wall, right? And no matter how perfect the system is, and I'm talking about a whole complex on this topic with all sorts of methods, techniques, deep philosophy, and so on, you won't get through. You just keep hitting those blocks and that's it. And the stronger the blocks, the stronger the fears, the stronger the resentments towards the world, towards life, the worse it will be. How can you tell that the blocks might be getting in the way if they're strong? It's really easy to check this. If you're a really sensitive person, I'm not talking about you right now, but more about the guys. Yeah, about the guys. So if you're a really sensitive person, if you get offended by everything, you still need to take a relatively clear-eyed approach to self-assessment. If a person can't do that, then it gets a bit tricky. But if someone can honestly and clearly evaluate themselves and their psyche, then those really strong resentments will come to light. Self-assessment is tough, but recognizing deep resentments is crucial. But if a person can sincerely and clearly assess themselves and their psyche, then those really strong resentments will come to light. It's like someone said something to you and it just shakes you to your core. Well, that's like a block. That's a block and it can get in the way. For example, if you're listening to someone on YouTube and it just makes you shake with anger or frustration, like how can they say such nonsense about some soul or some kind of connection? That's also a block. That's also a block and it can get in the way. And it gets in the way. Right now, I'm speaking completely sincerely, and I say this to everyone, to all of you guys. If you have a total rejection of another position, like a complete and total one, where you're just like, I'm right, this is correct, and that is absolutely wrong, that's just terrible, that can also get in the way. Honestly, I wouldn't even get into this topic. I'm a practical person, yeah, as I mentioned before. I need to use what works. I wouldn't get into the topic of re-educating humanity. It's an absolutely thankless topic. But unfortunately, these blocks get in the way of connecting with the higher ones. They really, on a practical level, get in the way a lot, and you have to work with them. So again, during the entire second month, we're really working on these blocks. But you can also work on them through psychotherapy, through some self-analysis, through, for example, there's some really great literature on this topic with a lot of different authors who write really well about it. Everything that really triggers you and undoubtedly brings up these so-called 6 main fundamental negative emotions. The psychotherapist who works with me in the course, like a regular psychotherapist, meaning he's formal, he's not at the school, he's a separate person, a separate friend of mine. I send people to him quite often. So he's talking about these 6 fundamental and basic emotions: fear, resentment, loneliness, guilt, sadness, anger, 6 so-called negative emotions. So if something really triggers you with these 6 emotions, like really strong sadness, really strong disappointment, really strong resentment, really strong guilt, really strong fear, that's naturally the first thing to look at. In relation to anything, this can get in the way of connecting with your higher self. So for example, people with depression, people with, and of course with some personality disorders, God forbid, people with maybe, those who are in a state of strong neurosis really struggle to connect with their higher self because they're kind of stuck in it. They're living in all of that. So, for example, if someone has recently lost a loved one and they're really going through that moment of their relative's death and they're experiencing it very emotionally, it will also be difficult for them.
You're talking about personality disorders, and then you said something like God forbid, right? Or heaven forbid. But there are people who, for example, have schizophrenia, some intense hostile schizophrenia. There are just crazy people. Oh, yeah, just crazy. They are actually located in certain places. What do you think that is? What's up with these people? Why is that? Why do they even exist?
Yeah, we looked at that question again, but at this stage, I would say, for example, if we take schizophrenia, it's like a certain glitch in a computer. I mean, if you compare it, that's the simplest analogy. A person, a driver, is driving a car. The driver is the spirit. It's the spirit that has come and is driving this car along the highway of their life. The car is the body. The physical body, basically, its job is to turn the wheels and move forward. And the mind, it turns out, is the mental body, partly etheric, astral, all these supporting bodies. They may not be physically formal, but they are mortal. That's already the car's software and so on and so forth. But sometimes the software glitches and the driver is turning the wheel, but the car isn't turning. It's just racing off wherever the software decides to go. So if we put it very simply, it's a certain glitch, either in the mental body or in the etheric body or in the astral body. It's a certain glitch. For example, my grandmother suffered from Alzheimer's disease in the last years of her life. She passed away at 91, as they say. May she rest in peace. Yes, and in the last years, she really had Alzheimer's. I saw that she had a spirit. Again, since I'm a specialist in the energy of the spirit, I can really feel the spirit clearly. Her spirit was trapped in the body like in a dungeon. He couldn't express himself. So it's this feeling like the spirit just can't fully express itself. It doesn't have all the control levers. A number of levers, to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the severity of the illness, seem to be limited. He doesn't have all the control levers. A number of levers, to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the severity of the disease, are as if limited. You can't, you move them, but there's no effect at all. So it's kind of like that. So I would say that it's a certain breakdown, which is also not good for the spirit. But especially if it starts from childhood, it's a conscious choice to be born in such a body, to understand something, to go through something like that.
So you're talking about your grandmother, right? And saying that the spirit is trapped in the body and so on. But you, as a spirit work specialist, maybe you weren't at that level back then. If we take it now, is there something that can be done to free that spirit, so to speak, from the confinement of the body? And at that moment, most likely the person themselves would change too. So, does it work like that or not?
No, you see, it all comes down to physics again. If the physics is already broken, if the physics is completely broken, then liberation from this body means physical death. In this case, so what happened to her happened in a pretty short period of time. So the spirit freed itself. It just turned off the body and that's it. Heal body. So right now we're more about getting the body to function again, getting all those layers restored. Here you need not a spirit specialist, but a healer. Here you really need a healer who will work on the physical level. So I always say that you need to solve a problem at the level where it actually exists. So in this case, if it's a problem related to physics, then you need to treat the physics first. Yeah, there are probably deeper psychosomatic reasons, that's true. But again, a psychosomatic specialist won't be able to connect with such a person. So, for a psychosomatic specialist, a certain level of mental clarity is needed to work with a person, to try to restore the physical through their psyche. But if the psyche is completely shattered, then we need to try to heal it, at least on a physical level. But if we're talking about already advanced cases, then most likely no. Here, well, again, for every effect, there's a cause. Since the spirit allowed something like this to happen to a person, it means that it was needed for some reason in the final stages of their time here to learn a particular lesson there. All of this, what I just described, is like the average temperature in a hospital. You always need to look at the individual case, preferably from a higher self perspective, to understand what's going on in each specific situation for each person. Yeah.
Well, yeah, basically each person has their own unique story and nuances. Yes. But now I want to go back to talking at the level of 3-year-old kids. So that doesn't mean you have to imagine a child. I mean more to explain it in simpler terms. For example, when we were talking on the call, and now we're saying that the spirit is something constant that exists before I came into this world and will be here after I leave this world. So some kind of constant. The soul is something different, distinct from the spirit, right? But the soul also comes here, so indeed the soul exists before I came to this planet, and it will undoubtedly be here after I leave this planet, because, well, that's what billions or millions of people certainly say, both wise and knowledgeable, as if both the spirit and the soul come, or rather both exist independently of me, as is often said. Well, first, what's the exact difference here? And second, where is all of this located? Where is this spirit? How can I understand it? We're talking, and it seems like I understand everything you're saying, but because I haven't experienced it myself, I'm basically just discussing something that I haven't lived through. So, my brain, which feels completely material and earthly, can't fully grasp and form this picture in general. And I'm like, well, the spirit, yeah, it always exists, regardless of me. It will be, because it was, well, the soul also comes here. So it was and it will be after. What's the difference? But how do you determine that? But how do you understand that? So I have a lot of questions, or it could even be just one. How can I just take this knowledge and shove it into my head without facing it from you right now?
Overall, there's a huge confusion in esotericism. And in my opinion, the biggest problem is with the names, I mean, the terminology, because each school has its own understanding of each term. I'll explain how I see it. Without any terms, on a practical level. Again, there are mortal bodies and there are immortal bodies. The mortal body, arms, legs, head, mortal. We died, the body died. There's the etheric body, which follows the physical one, and you can see it with physical sight, that is, against a white background. By the way, for those of you who are a bit into aura reading, we have a white background right now. On that white background, you can easily see the etheric body, which is a bright blue, about this far from the physical body, give or take. Some people see it a bit further away, some a bit closer, but it's a bright blue. Just turn off the light, go into the bathroom if you're practicing aura reading. My wife and I practiced for about a year, give or take. Especially for her, it started to work really well. So it's a real body, you can see it. The etheric body serves the physical body with all those energy channels and the 3 centers of Tantra. You can really see them like you can actually see them. So all this, Chinese medicine mainly works on the etheric body. This is the mortal body. After death, it will also disintegrate at some point. Next, there's the astral body. Again, this is the mortal body, the so-called aura, the astral body. You can also see it with physical sight. So, if you practice this for about a year, when you go into the bathroom, you'll see the cocoon, which is roughly this wide, with all the chakras. In this layer, there are also some above and below, but usually there are 7 of them in the aura. The astral body also starts to disintegrate after death at some point. And there's the mental body, the body of the mind. It's a bit more difficult to see it. You can rather feel it within yourself. But you can see it too, though that's a separate topic. So these are the mortal bodies. You can see them and you can even feel them with your hand. So guys who, for example, do telekinesis with the etheric body, they really feel the etheric body and the telekinesis. Those who do mental telekinesis also really feel the mental body as a body, like a field. These are all mortal bodies, right? There are immortal bodies. Immortal bodies? Here's my favorite analogy. Once upon a time, there was Vasya. Once upon a time, there was Vasya, and then he died. He died down there. The body is lying while he keeps flying off somewhere up there into the higher realms. There he goes, flying away, flying away, flying away, flying away. It goes through certain stages. Specific transition. Again, there are tons of different books on this topic. And at some point, this Vasya finds himself, let's say, in the afterlife, in the post-mortal world. So there, certain things happen to him. So he's sitting there analyzing his life, rethinking it, wondering what to do next. This is, for those guys who believe in reincarnation, we fully support it. So me and my club, we fully support the idea of reincarnation. We've seen a lot of different things many times, but this could be a topic for some separate questions or specific sessions. And that state of Vasya after death, well, there's formally the higher self. And then Vasya makes a decision again, like, okay, I got it. I've rested enough. Let's go on a business trip now. He comes back down here again. Again, his etheric astral body grows over time. Not in the first year usually, more like around 5 to 7 years. And that's it. And so he kind of lives his life again. And now let's talk about the terms. So this is the picture that you can really see. And when it comes to terms, it can be interpreted in many different ways. For example, some schools say that, well, that state of Vasya in the afterlife is also, by the way, multi-layered. So if you really get into the details, Vasya, his spirit, the spirit of Vasya, it's like he's very multi-layered, that's true, and it actually feels that way in practice. The higher the layer is closer to God, the more you feel that everything is one, and one is everything. It all changes a bit up there. But some schools say that the very top layer, that's the higher self. And it's the spirit, while everything else is the soul. Other schools oppose this. They say, no, you're all wrong. The soul is basically the substance that you build up throughout your life, a certain experience that you accumulate. The spirit and the soul is different every time, while the spirit is always the same. This is another direction in esotericism. Others, for example, say that overall everything is the soul, and we should just forget about the word spirit. It's a religious term that was introduced by some unclear source, and so on. There are a lot of such discrepancies. But in fact, there are just mortal bodies and immortal bodies, that's it. And then you can call it whatever you want, whether it's soul, spirit, or higher self. Sometimes people argue with me. They write to me saying, "You're saying everything wrong. Actually, the higher self is this, and the soul is that." I tell them, guys, I'm not arguing. I'm a practitioner. There are eternal bodies that leave after death, and there are those that die, and then you can call them whatever you want. Even, I don't know, body number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. Even if you give them QR codes for each body, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the practice in any way. Well, something like that.
Okay. Well, of course, it didn't become any clearer. Well, you just mentioned that the soul is more of a religious term, right? Someone said
They say, yeah.
you've probably looked into religions. Can you share your opinion or just say something in general on this topic? Because there are many religions and they are different. There have been a lot of prophets and so on and so forth.
I guess I'm some kind of, again, a wrong esoteric. But I have a very positive attitude towards religion because, again, from the perspective of the higher self, no matter how many times I've looked into the topic of religion, I've never seen any denial or rejection there. Well, actually, in the higher self, there's no denial or rejection towards anything at all. But what's good about religions? They still guide a person and humanity as a whole towards spirituality. To spirituality from the word spirit, by the way, if we're getting into it, right. They guide us towards spirituality, yes, through rituals, through some teachings, through ancient books. But if there were no religions at all, especially if we remember the stages of life and the development of humanity when religions emerged, if those ideas about all those wool sacrifices to the old gods had remained, we definitely wouldn't have come to anything good. For example, Christian morality and again Muslim morality, the morality in Islam, the morality in Christianity, and to some extent, the morality in Buddhism, but especially, by the way, the morality in Christianity and Islam is very spiritually high. It has very high vibrations, yes, but it's a bit dogmatic. But again, at those stages when these religions emerged, that's how it had to be. There was no other way it could have turned out, as I see it, as I feel it. And it's very, well, it's still a harmonious path. It's a very harmonious path. It has a strong charge. So look, a bunch of people, for example, in Islam or Christianity are striving for God. So what are they doing? They are striving for spirituality. They are striving for something good. And even just from the perspective of esotericism, if so many people are striving for something good to become better in any way, right? It's a very powerful, very pure egregore, a very powerful one. I've seen a lot of people deeply into religion, both in Christianity and in Islam. What's the correct way, by the way, in Islam or in Muslim faith? In Islam, probably, right?
In Islam, yes.
In Islam, yes. But I've seen a lot of very spiritual people. I mean, you really look at them and you can see the energy of the spirit coming right out of their eyes, just like it does in a child. Very pure energy, very bright. I sometimes marvel at how people reach the deepest heights of spirit through the path of religion. It's not really my path, I always tell everyone that, but if you follow this path, you can reach some truly high peaks. So, my attitude towards religion is purely positive. Yeah, there were all sorts of various excesses, both at that level, and Christians did a lot of different things, and there were certain things in Islam too. But if you think about it again, it's in fact conditioned by the time, by the era. Christ says one thing, and then all of it ultimately gets twisted to fit the trends of the time. To politics in the end, to something else. This couldn't be avoided. This couldn't be avoided, but the very essence there is very pure, very strong, very bright. So, as they say, my deepest respect goes to absolutely all the world religions that exist on this planet.
And the question overall about God for you, God, who is that? Again, why I'm asking you this. Who is God for you? Because well, there are some interviews I've recorded with people, and they seem to put the higher self not exactly on the same level as God, but as if that is God. So there is this one big common thing that we all connect to, and some people call it the higher self. So in talking to you, I get the sense that the higher self, the soul, and God seem to be three different things. I'd like to understand, hear from you, God. Do you believe in him? Who is he for you? What scale is he on? And so on.
Again, it's a matter of terms. For me, there are mortal bodies and immortal bodies. And when we touch upon the immortal bodies, I formally call them the bodies of the higher self. That's all of it. But you can call them whatever you want. At a certain level of immersion into that transcendence, into that meditativeness, you start to feel God. That's true. We even have a practice, I have a practice of connecting with God through the higher self. It's not an easy practice because, again, if we're not at the level of visualization, not at the level of some kind of representation of God, but rather through real contact with him, we reach his level exclusively through this very practice of transcendence. Guys, again, those who are into deep transcendental meditative practices understand what I'm talking about right now. It's really hard. You know, the deeper you go into those layers, the harder it is to describe what you feel there in words, because it's such a different level. Here and there, it's completely different. That is to say, it is completely, these deep mystical transcendental revelations, they are completely different. They're different. They're not connected to the mind at all. Then you come back and sometimes you can't even remember what happened there. So I always teach to keep a little bit of the mind, just a bit, so it can act as an interpreter to describe what we feel from those deeper layers. And God definitely exists, the creator of everything, the absolute. I felt him as energy. Is he connected to the higher self? At his level, yes. At his level, he is connected to the higher self because the more you go into those higher layers of your own immortal bodies, the closer you get to a special state where there's no karma, nothing exists, no past, no future, at least in the classical sense of the word. Yum, yum. Everything is one. One is everything. In general, everything happens all at once, and there isn't even a moment as such. Again, it's really hard to describe. And at this level, you really start to feel something so vast, so global, in a way that is truly and deeply incomprehensible to the human mind, yet undeniably present, that you could probably call it God or the Creator or the Absolute. Because you understand that it really is everything. It's dissolved in everything at once. And at the same time is something that is, in a way, still individual. So, I'll put it this way. If we were to draw some kind of scheme at the highest levels of this multidimensional picture of the higher self, there, at the very top, we can really feel like the creator of everything, completely merging with it in a kind of nirvana, if we can use Buddhist term here. But again, it's all so primitive and it's just something that can't really be conveyed in words. You really need to go in, look, feel. It's basically a practice. That's how it is.
In general, it's just a different dimension, a different scale that our consciousness can't grasp. You mentioned that you believe in reincarnation, right? And the guys from your club, for me, it's a big, not so much a problem, but my own issue or task, I guess. I don't want to call it a problem. My main task is that the more I talk to esoteric people, the less I understand. There's a saying, as many people, as many opinions. Just in the previous interview, I was talking to someone who said, there are no past lives, there's no time, nothing exists. Everything is happening all at once. And conditionally, if I go into regression and I'm told that I'm going into a past life, then I'm not really looking at a past life. I'm actually tapping into one of the possible events, so to speak. So I'm looking at something that's happening in parallel. And the main question has always been, and it still remains, that's actually one of the reasons why at some point I chose a religion for myself. Because in religion, everything is pretty clear and you don't have to search for anything or get hung up on anything, so to speak. You have what you're given, like in a problem, and you live relative to that given everything. A step to the right, a step to the left. Well, it's not a firing squad, but it doesn't make sense. So, esoterics have been a part of my life for about 5 years now, and for about 4 years, it's been really intense. So, it's this constant interaction with masters, with people who see, hear, feel, and so on. And a big problem for me is the task, or rather, to understand who among them is right. Because yesterday, someone told me that there is no time, no reincarnation, no past lives. And today, I'm talking to you, of course, also a master, a specialist at a high level with a huge background, with knowledge, schools, and everything else. And at that moment, you're telling me that reincarnations exist, you believe in it, your club believes in it. And I'm like, so what should I do then? So soft mystical, then I get it. Whose truth should I accept, you know?
Listen, look, again, I'm speaking as a practitioner. Ideally, just get to that vision, that feeling of all of this, and see it for yourself in your mind truly and vividly, and experience it. That will be your very own experience, the most accurate answer to the question. From my side, I can say this. What's interesting about the drying method, it's interesting because I kind of chose it for myself at some point, or maybe it chose me. My contact with this has been there since childhood. I mean, over time, I realized that this is generally called a contact with the spirit in esotericism. I've had this contact since childhood, so I kind of realized over time that this is generally called a contact with the spirit in esotericism. And then I started to get more into it, and what do I like about it? Because it's still as free as possible from any egregores, from any schools. When people come to me and ask, which school are you initiated into? Not in any, do you give initiations into a school? I don't. On the contrary, I remove everything that exists. Because yes, if you want to touch your higher self in a pure way, you go. As one of the methods, if you want to call the whole complex with one word, yes, it's the method, the path of complete and total desolidification. You let go of everything completely, and at some point, your own inner divine pure energy starts to manifest naturally in the process of desolidification. And with it, you naturally can't desolidify because it's like that very sun outside the window, right? The dirty, murky rooms that you've cleaned up, and then you wiped all the dirt off the window, and the sun shines through because it's just there. That's it. This is a pure method, and I trust pure methods more, not egregorial ones, not those connected with some energies, some cosmic energy, and so on. Again, I don't know, with channeling and so on. I'm in no way denying that all of this exists, but it can introduce certain additional distortions. And here we have purest energy. But if we're talking about those masters you mentioned, who say that there are no past lives, everything happens simultaneously. Actually, I agree with them. In fact, again, globally, when you go there to God, the Absolute, the Creator, and so on, everything happens simultaneously. There is no past, there is no future. We talked a little about this today. Yes, this is a high, very high transcendent level of true reality, as they say, of things. But here, in this world, there's the so-called illusion of space and time, that same Maya that the Buddhists described, who, by the way, said that even after death, you still remain in Maya, you still remain in the illusion, it's all still an illusion. And that's partly true too. It's the illusion of space and time, it's the illusion of past lives. But in our world, there is a past, it's an illusion, and there is a future, it's an illusion. But yes, since there is a past and there is a future, there is a past life and there is a future life. And if we continue this thought, then in the illusion of space and time, we can even conditionally talk about a certain age of the soul, rather in the age of the spirit, right? Because again, in the illusion of space and time, one person had one life, while someone else had 100 lives. So the one who had 100 lives is naturally a bit more experienced in spirit than the one who had just one life. But it's exactly the illusion of space and time, that's a fact. Because at higher levels, as we've discussed today, all of this comes together into a single picture. Everything is one. One is everything. I've been there. I've been at those levels. I've been there about 6 or 7 times, probably, in such deep practice. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Those guys who say that past lives exist are indeed in the illusion of space and time, in the illusion where there is a past and a future, they are there. And those who say that everything happens simultaneously are right. So in that sense, yes. But you know what's the most interesting part? It might seem from my words that the illusion is a bad thing. Since it's an illusion, we're generally used to thinking that illusion is a bad thing. The cherry on top is that from the perspective of the higher self, no matter how many times I've looked at it, the illusion isn't bad. It's just God's game. So God plays like that. Is it bad that we sit down and play video games or lay out some solitaire or do some strategy games? Is that bad or not? It's just a way to get a certain interactive experience. It's the same here. The spirit gets an interactive experience, and this interactive experience is very clearly defined. So for the spirit, the illusion isn't bad. And by the way, the idea of getting out of the illusion, getting out of Maya, which is promoted in Buddhism, from the perspective of the higher self, I've never really felt a strong resonance with that. There are methods to get out of this illusion, yes. But if you tap into the higher self and ask yourself there, like, why are we getting out? You start to feel like, what's the point? It's just a game. It's a game, meaning you came here to play and gain experience. Yeah, you can definitely turn off the computer, shut down the game, get up and do something else. If you want to, then yes. But if you sat down and are playing, most likely you had some goals that made you sit down. And until you resolve those goals, getting up probably doesn't make much sense, like there's some meaning in it. And until you resolve those goals, getting up probably doesn't make much sense, like there's some meaning in it.
The question is strange, considering that you've been working on your higher self school for 11 years and so on. That is, for me, the answer would be logical that it is important to do this. But anyway, I'll ask, how important is it for people to be aware of their connection with the higher self right now, to move in that direction, to look in that direction, and how can it impact society as a whole?
It's important because when we tap into the higher self, again, it's a pure path. It's a pure path. I probably wouldn't even associate it with esotericism. Many people come to me who have no connection to esotericism at all. So they are completely pragmatic people. They just want to improve their lives, build relationships, because they constantly have some strange stories happening in their lives. It's like a black streak, then a white one. You never know when the white streak will end, and the black one will begin. And how long will the darkest one last? And why is the black streak so long, while the white one is so short? That is, these questions are really of concern to all the guys. And the higher self method, well, let's call it the higher self method. I tell the guys this. You might not believe in esotericism, spirits, reincarnation, or anything else, but this method really helps a person become calmer, more relaxed, more at peace, and somehow a more harmonious person, more tranquil and less rigid. They start to better understand what they actually want from life. Their health gradually improves. He starts to understand better what he actually wants from life. His health gradually improves. What's going on there? Health, finances. Oh, and finances too, basically. So his whole life gets better. It becomes more harmonious, better, and so on. For example, I can share my own experience. I used to have such a severe stutter. So back in school, I remember around 9th or 10th grade, I stuttered so much. If we had an interview, it would probably start with something like, hello, dear Sergey, and that would probably be where it ends. So, as of today, there's still something lingering in the background. I can see it, but formally speaking, if we're being factual, it's gotten much better. Anyone who sees me from school now, guys, it's like on Field of Wonders. I'm sending greetings to all my classmates who had to endure my performances in various classes. Then I had a bunch of other questions related to this, all sorts of different ones about health, for example, and finances. I have been working through a lot of things. The help of the higher self. I partially worked on some things. Yes, with a psychotherapist. Of course, naturally, I love many of my fellow psychotherapists. I sometimes go to them myself, if necessary, yes. But still, the main focus is through the higher I, because the higher I is its own psychotherapist. It's just that some things can be done faster through a psychotherapist than through the higher self. With skin issues, for example, or something else, I go straight to the higher self and I see that it's quicker to resolve it through a psychotherapist. It's just faster. Because using the higher self to deal with these kinds of issues is like, I don't know, trying to get the director of a big company like Gazprom or some oil and gas company to come and replace a printer in some random office in a distant city. So it's much more effective if you just solve it from here. That's it. For example, my eyes, a lot of people ask me, I can see it in the comments, they're writing, why haven't you healed your eyes yet? There are certain reasons why I haven't healed my eyes yet. Over time, I will return to my eyes. I'll focus on my eyes and work on it. So I will focus on my eyes. I'll work on this topic separately and specifically. I'll take it on and work on it too. I've also been enhancing my finances really well through the higher self. I'll take it on and work on that too. I really boosted my finances through the higher self. It works really well. It's really great. And by the way, it works well through psychotherapy too and through the higher self. And at the intersection of psychotherapy and the higher self, it works like clockwork. And again, anticipating the questions from the commenters like, why are you also spiritual and still selling your courses for money? I've never been shy about it. I have always told everyone, yes, that I sell my courses for money. There was a period in the school of donation by heart, but globally, I always had a paid school in general, how I launched it. And so many times I did not go to the higher self. I always saw, always, absolutely always. And all the guys from the club see this, that the idea, that spirituality, this is not equal to money, that if you promote spirituality, then money, this is just horror. This is money from the devil. I've never found any confirmation of that, none at all. Because the feeling from the higher self looks something like this. Money, like everything in this world, is the energy of God. So what's the first thing about money? The energy of the creator of everything who is dissolved everywhere. Money is basically just a form of exchange in this society. So where people, in a sense, exchange one effort for another, there's nothing wrong with money. Nothing. It's just the energy of God. You know, I had a text, again, there was a text about how God loves money, about how money is divine energy. I think we even closed comments on this text because, to put it mildly, not everyone agreed with it. But again, guys, just step into practice, into the pure practice. Set aside all those ideas that money is from the devil, that money is bad, that money corrupts, and so on. Just dive into the pure practice and see what we have there with the energy of money. There's nothing wrong with it. Just step into the practice, into the pure practice, and see what we have there with the energy of money. There's nothing wrong with it. I genuinely, when I dive in, I always set up an experiment. I always look at the pure, I'll see what I see. I'm ready for any answer, even if it's about money, I don't know, from the highest devil or whatever. No way. Money is just energy. At this stage, it's like this. Over time, it will change. In about 200, 300 years, it will change. The format of money as we know it will be a little different. Fairer, more honest, more true, in line with the spirit of the time that awaits us in the future. But at this stage, for this society, it's like this. That's how it is. And again, yes, by accepting money in my school, I've had the opportunity to focus solely on the higher self for 12 years. If I were working at a factory and selling TVs at the same time, I would have much less time to focus on the club and research on the higher self. And simpler. So there's nothing wrong with that. As they say, it's confirmed. It's confirmed by millions of practices from all sorts of different backgrounds. It's just energy, nothing more. The very idea that money is bad, that we should completely reject money, honestly speaking, that idea actually plays into the hands of dark forces, not light ones. Because if you limit a person in terms of money, in today's world, a lack of money means a lack of opportunities. So you're just sitting there in front of a screen, or even better, in front of a TV, but you have no opportunity to go anywhere, to broaden your horizons, or even to attend some courses, Because if you limit a person in money, in the modern world, lack of money is lack of opportunities. So you're just sitting there right in front of the screen, but you have no opportunity to go anywhere. This allows those who don't have such a mindset to get richer. Everyone else is struggling to find that motivation to take action. All those other transnational corporations are getting richer and becoming the masters of the planet. On one hand, this allows those who don't have that mindset to get richer, and that's already a certain manipulation of public consciousness, telling everyone that money is bad, while at the same time, as they say, quietly, founding a number of transnational corporations. Meanwhile, everyone else is struggling to find that motivation to take action, to discover something, to move forward, to develop, to embrace this variety of options. Instead, they sit there quietly, thinking, Well, whatever money we get sent is all we can manage with. During this time, all those other transnational corporations are getting richer and becoming the masters of the planet, trying to dictate their will to the entire civilization. So in this regard, I actually believe that the idea that money is bad plays right into the hands of these so-called demonic forces. During this time, all the other transnational corporations are getting richer and becoming the masters of the planet, trying to dictate their will to the entire civilization. So in this regard, I actually believe that the mindset that money is bad plays right into the hands of these so-called demonic forces more than, let's say, the light ones. And by the way, it might even be partly promoted by these very forces than, let's say, the light ones. And by the way, it might even be partly promoted by these very forces. This needs to be checked in the SSHM. It's a bold, sharp hypothesis, right? Maybe someday we'll do a check on it with the club.
Sometimes it seems to me that people who say money is bad, that there's unhappiness in money or something like that, are the ones who don't have any money. And they try to justify their lack of money that way.
Yes.
Is there a risk of misunderstanding when working with the higher self? And how can we avoid manipulations or a general misunderstanding there?
There are no manipulations from the perspective of the higher self because the higher self is us. So everyone always talks about how there's the higher self and then there's us, but the higher self is actually us. This is the same Vasya who died, went over there and, he died and he has become the higher self. But again, anyone can die and become their higher self. But setting up a connection with the higher self while still alive without dying, that's interesting. I always tell everyone that the most important value of connecting with the higher self is right here. Contact with yourself without dying, because after death we will become an eternal spirit anyway. But to feel this energy here, this layer here, and to use this energy to live this life better, more harmoniously, more effectively. And the fact that this has become possible in our current reality, by the way, this brings up something. Sometimes I get asked if it's like hacking the system, when you try to touch the higher self, and sort of take that energy from there, trying to understand something, and it makes your life better. Isn't it like cheating? Well, no, it doesn't work that way. Because if the spirit didn't need it, then we wouldn't be talking about it in this world today. We wouldn't be discussing it in this reality. A person simply wouldn't have come across this information and so on and so forth. So, since a person has encountered it, they were born on this planet, not on some other planet where, let's say, everyone is still running around in skins and hunting dinosaurs, roughly speaking, right? He was born here, he was born in this area, he came across this information, so everything is fine. So let's get back to the question. The higher self is your own energy. So there are probably no manipulations over oneself, over your own self. But misunderstandings, some distortions, yes, because if, again, the question, for example, we're looking at something very important, significant, well, like, I don't know how much time is left to live. This is a very important question for the mind. It's very important.
How much time is left for Putin? Could you kindly say it for me?
Well, it really depends on that specific person's attitude towards Putin, right? Or towards Zelensky. It can go the other way, too, or towards Biden, or again towards Trump or anyone else, any person who, for one reason or another, is important to you. Important topics for the mind, and they can get in the way. That's right, these topics can get in the way because a person won't be able to truly dive deep into that transcendence, into those very layers. They won't really be able to deeply connect with their spirit. Again, there are a number of criteria and so on, but that's not the point. The point is that he won't be able to reach those criteria either. And then he will have distortions. It will be clearly visible. Will his experience be enough to see that this is the mind? In fact, the spirit has its own handwriting. Any energy of the higher self has its own unique handwriting. It's a special kind of energy. It feels really unique. You can feel it physically. Can a person understand that they are currently mixed with that energy and the mind? The mind also has its own handwriting. Those guys who have been dealing with these topics for many years, they really start to feel that this is the mind and they need to let go of some things, right? So doesn't interfere. And here it's like the field is clear and the energy is purer. The layers here are less pure. You can already feel it. You can feel it. And this can be, yes, the mind can start to interfere, especially with important questions, and it can really get in the way of accessing that transcendence. So initially, I always recommend absolutely everyone, if we're looking into something through the higher self, then look at something as neutral as possible. At least, if in Moscow 500 years from now, you really won't see it. For you, this is completely neutral information. But if you're, for example, looking into a community of guys and there are, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 people, you're all looking blindly. And then one day at 1 hour, you just share this experience. This is how we do all the readings today. We look into it and then we say, all right, everyone, now publish your results. And everyone published it. And then we look, well, if it's an experienced practice, then it will be pretty much the same. The same thing, different phrasings, different words, but it's basically the same thing. And you start to believe yourself on the level of the mind that, well, about 30 people will tell pretty much the same thing, even if it's about Moscow 500 years in the future from the mind. So it means that we still saw and felt something deeply, right? And little by little, a person starts to feel this energy of the spirit, where the mind is, where the spirit is, where there's more mind, where there's more spirit. But in the early stages, this is a very common problem. You can make mistakes, so I always tell everyone, guys, don't ask something important like, I don't know, are they going to operate on me or not? Well, I mean, again, I don't have other words, but it's really important for the mind. It's very important. You can see anything you want, and you might very well see it incorrectly. For complex questions like that, you need to wait until the end, until you're really an experienced practitioner. And you can completely set aside your personality and just focus on that pure, eternal energy. That's right. But in the early stages, it's better to stick to something simpler, something calmer, something lighter.
Well, yeah, if something triggers you, then basically the objectivity of how you perceive reality changes. We're going to try to hear what we want to hear. Yeah, it changes. I'm looking through the links you sent me, and there's an article about how there's no karma. How is there no karma? It seems that when you say there's no karma, at that moment I start to imagine some kind of chaos where people are like, yeah, whatever, there's no karma. I'm just going to go do something crazy, you know. Can you go into a bit more detail?
Listen, yeah. But this text, he gathered so many views, he got so many showings.
Yeah, see.
Because apparently, everyone does. Over the years working on this topic, it's been 11 years in school and 25 years in practice. I realized that with each passing year, I dive deeper. It's a kind of diving into the ocean. So it's like with each year, you can dive deeper and stay there longer and then come back up. And even, by the way, if you look at my videos, how I do all sorts of readings, what am I doing? I dive in and then I kind of come back up a bit, describing in words what I see. Then I dive in again, look again, come back up, describe in words. So it's like that, impulsively. And in the last few years, I've started diving to a level where there really is no karma. So in those layers that are close to the Creator, to the eternal and infinite, there is no past, no future, none of that, as we've already talked about. And since there's none of that, then there's no karma either. What is karma anyway? It's the law of cause and effect. If there's a cause, then there's an effect. So again, we're breaking this down, right? So there's A, which ultimately led to B. And at a certain level, there's such an interesting attitude towards karma, which I described in this text, where there is basically no karma. Well, there isn't. So you understand from there, being at that level, if you can even use the term understand for these levels, you realize that it's like, like a kind of video game. I mean, again, imagine you actually sat down to play a computer game, for instance, GTA, just to make it clear for everyone. Yeah, like a shooter action game, and you're running this character around the screen. How concerned are you about the consequences for him? Yeah, there will probably be some consequences. There will be, but there won't be any direct consequences for you. That's the thing. The problem, and from that level, there really is no karma in the sense of cause and effect. It's a kind of game of the spirit. But at the same time, of course, we shouldn't forget that on the earthly level, karma definitely exists. And it will definitely come back quickly on the level of laws and on the level of some kind of energetic retribution. It will definitely come back too, but at a certain level of spirit, a very high one. There, well, that perspective is really abstracted from all these karmic, so to speak, views. Maybe someday we'll do some kind of meditation, I don't know, like this online, and I might go back to that level and try to describe it with words. This might be a bit of a strange speech because that text we're talking about is also a bit strange. But maybe I can try to somehow convey to the viewers this energy of that transcendent layer, because right now, in this interview, I'm mostly speaking from my personality, and there, we'll try to speak from there. By the way, if anyone is interested, and if you don't mind, please give this video a like. If we gather a lot of likes, then we could maybe do an experiment like that. Well, if you, as the host, as the owner of this space, are okay with it.
I'm totally okay with that. I'd love to. Now, again, I'm not saying this in a devaluing way, but then it turns out that by and large, the information that there is no karma can be perceived simply as a certain clickbait. As for me, a person who lives on Earth in a world where there is a cause, there is a consequence, the information that there is no karma is somewhere there on some layers at the level of the higher self. Well, it's like that. Well, to put it simply, if I got the information from you that there is no karma, then I didn't really get it. Well, honestly, nothing has changed. Well, nothing has really changed for me. So I realized that yes, and I really felt it, that at that level there is no karma. But it feels like, how does this affect my life? I don't think it does at all.
It doesn't affect anything, that's true. But I wouldn't say it's exactly clickbait and that this doesn't exist. Because, for example, telling you that there are quarks, photons, quarks, and so on, it's also, we used to know that conditionally atoms have all these things like the nucleus, protons, electrons, and so on. Then we found out that it turns out there are also quarks there. How much has this information changed our lives? Well, most likely, not at all. It's like they were traveling the world eating chips, watching movies, or doing something else. So I'm saying that yes, this information doesn't affect life in any way, but that doesn't mean we can say it's not true. That's true. Quarks exist. Yes, you can see them. There is this layer where there is no karma. Yes. You can also see this in deep, intense practice. I can think of about 4 or 5 people from the club who might be able to reach that layer. So there is no karma, yes, but it doesn't affect our lives in any way. That's true.
It's still worth living by your conscience and not making mistakes.
Yes, yes, yes. And that's the point. That's the point. That's exactly the rule of the game. There is no karma, but at the same time, you live by your conscience. And if you don't live by your conscience, then this karma will actually come down on you, so to speak. It's such an interesting paradox. Outside of time, outside of space, that's some deep philosophy.
What practices or techniques would you recommend to our viewers for strengthening their connection with their higher self, or at least getting a bit closer to it? So, something you can do right now, like do it this way.
This practice will probably be more related to some kind of psychoanalysis. It will involve finding all those really triggering spots within yourself, acknowledging that they exist. That's the hardest part. To admit that, for example, when you're writing angry comments, there's some underlying dissatisfaction with your possible life. That's really tough. So I'm serious. Right now, this is a fact. Any psychotherapist, really, who will be working on this topic will confirm that, yes, it's a fact. It's a medical fact that's been documented for many years. Yes, acknowledging that and starting to work on yourself, starting to work on your aggression, starting to work on depression, if it exists, and working on your own tensions in a broader sense. Ego, again, the ego itself isn't bad. It's a driving force, a certain sense of your own self. But the ego, as I always describe it, is this hypertrophied separation of your I from the general flow of life. It's not just about standing out to express your individuality and so on. In that sense, everything is perfectly fine. It's this so-called false ego, as it's described in books, this false ego that's hypertrophied, which doesn't just showcase its individuality, but does so at the expense of others, it's definitely worth working on that kind of ego too. It's a very strong mental pattern that you really need to work on. Again, I've been working on my block my whole life, even more than I've been focusing on my higher self. And the more I work with them, the stronger the connection with my higher self becomes. It's an absolutely interpenetrating topic. It's an interpenetrating topic. Again, for example, back in the day, as I mentioned, I stuttered a lot in school and I wasn't really liked there. Well, they didn't particularly like me. They kind of teased me a bit. So I have some not so great memories from that period. And I really accessed my higher self for each of those negative memories, for those specific internal feelings. It's still your inner world and you carry those stones within you. I spent about 3 months accessing my higher self for each of those negative memories, not just from school. I started with school and then I moved on to everything else. I went through my whole life and cleared out all the negative memories. How did you clear them out? I would just access my higher self and see from there why those memories were necessary for me, why they were necessary for me, like why I ended up in that class or why I crossed paths with that particular person. But I saw this deep transcendent wisdom, all this beauty of the flower. It's really hard to describe. And again, I don't like the word hard because it feels like a lie, right? It was indescribable, but it was beautiful. I saw my whole life spiritually. It was transcendence. As of today, I can say with complete sincerity that I don't have a single negative memory. It was such a beautiful, transcendent experience. So listen, after that, honestly, as of today, I can say with complete sincerity that I don't have a single negative memory. All the memories that were negative have lost their negative tint. And the connection with the spirit has really intensified like by leaps and bounds. All the memories that were negative have lost their negative tint. And the connection with the spirit really intensified like by leaps and bounds. So it was quite a big job. So my practice is to make an appointment with a psychotherapist or just analyze yourself and reflect on and start working on your blocks using various and effective different methods. It's truly like if we really want, not a trendy practice, not something quick that can just touch a little and then rush off to hate on everyone again and so on and thoughtfully. That's exactly if we want a practice that will really work. This practice of working on your blocks makes it much easier to connect with your higher self. People who come to me and have a good connection with the spirit are statistically more or less happy people. There probably aren't completely happy people, but they are more or less happy.
Dear friends, I invite you all to my course with a personal vision, Return to the True Self. This course has been around for over 12 years. And recently we launched it in English with my complete personal vision in 6 modules, working with blocks, working with egregores, working with the ego, contacting the higher self. Answers to simple questions, answers to more complex questions. And then there's what we call the Great Journey. It's contact with space, contact with the planet, contact with God, contact with anything, at your request, through the higher self. Health, finances, relationships, purpose, past life. The course is available at any time. You can sign up for it using the link below this video. Come on over. I'll be waiting for you.
Danila, I have 2 questions for you. I'll combine them into one. These are the final questions. What is your personal philosophy on life and death? So, what have you learned over these years of working with your higher self? And what advice would you give to our viewers who are at the beginning of their journey towards self-development and self-discovery?
A piece of advice that will work for everyone. Listen to your heart. So listen to your heart as often as possible and as little as possible in your head. But sometimes your head can kind of guide you in the right direction. Analyze things a bit, but still, the main focus should be on your heart. On your heart, just like you feel it. That's the first one. And the second one, work on your blocks. This is really, again, like today, we've had this line running through everything, but it's very important. In my course, we also work on blocks, of course. So yes, but if you're already starting right now, for those of you watching me who might not want to come to my school, work on your blocks in different ways. This will definitely give you a much, much bigger a boost, a push forward, whether it's in energy conductivity, healing, and so on. If you're constantly angry, again, being aggressive and so on, everything will start to spiral. It will disrupt your energy. It will mess with your charges and so on. Actually in esotericism, strangely enough, there are very few people who encourage working on blocks, especially in deep esotericism, to really work with the ego and deal with those beliefs. This is more for those guys who are into psychotherapy and psychology. In esotericism, it's not really that common, often from what I see. But nevertheless, this is really the foundation because, for example, the spiritual ego is a powerful mechanism that limits spiritual development. For example, someone might say, yeah, what is this? It's me, it's him, it's me, which reflects the spiritual ego. I often admit I don't know or understand something, allowing for many interpretations. I have an ego and work with it like everyone else. Recognizing and addressing it can greatly benefit your life. Doing so helps you see the world more clearly, and energy flows better at the etheric, astral, and chakra levels. And, for example, here I am, yes, well, I always say that I don't know something, I don't understand something. I always allow for 1,500,000 different other interpretations and so on and so forth. And yes, I have an ego, I work with it just like everyone else, but at least starting to see it in yourself and beginning to work on it will give you tremendous benefits in your life. Because if you do this, you will start to see the world more clearly. Energy will eventually flow better, just faster at the level of the etheric body, at the level of the astral body, at the level of the chakras. The chakras will work better because they all get blocked, including by all sorts of distorted beliefs about the world. Yes, those standard affirmations for the chakras and so on. The chakras will work better because they all get blocked, including by all sorts of distorted beliefs about the world. And yes, those standard affirmations for the chakras and so on. This means life will be better, more harmonious, and more effective. Yes, those standard affirmations for the chakras and so on. So life will be better, more harmonious, and more effective. This is specifically in relation to people. And if we talk about what you asked, about death, what I've understood about life and death. First of all, I've seen so many of my deaths in past lives because there was a time when I really analyzed it. I accessed my past lives through my higher self, and I saw a ton of things there. First of all, I realized that death is nothing to be afraid of. It's not scary at all. It's just a shift in dimensions. I really lived through it. So for me at this stage, it's really a shift in dimensions. It's a shift in dimensions. And when the time comes, we will all really leave to to another world. That's it. And I really saw those things. I really saw them. And then I analyzed, looked at what I saw, what I felt, and compared it with some historical past events. And it always matched. Just the other day, I met with one of my students and he described how he found himself in a photograph. He clearly knew who he was in that past life. He actually saw it. And he found himself just in a photograph exactly as he remembered himself. He actually went and started looking for himself on the internet through archives and so on. I didn't have that, but I remember historical periods and events very clearly. And then I found a lot of confirmations that yes, that's how it was. So again, for me, the topic of past lives is absolutely clear. And this is specifically yours. If it were some kind of connection to an information database, it would still be like a certain movie. And here I remember it. I remember that it was me who did it, that these were my emotions, that I really loved that person. Not some abstract character, but I truly, honestly, really loved him, or I didn't love him, or I don't know. Something like that. So in terms of life and death over the years, I've realized that it's like one beautiful flower that opens and closes. One bud opens, then another bud opens. But it's all part of one big plant that either blooms one flower bud or another, but in the process it lives, grows, and gains experience. For me, it's not just words, it's like the result of practice.
Thank you so much for the interview.
Thank you.
Subscribe to the channel, leave comments, hit the bell, and do whatever you want because it's your life.